Heading into the secret storeroom to grab some of the reclaimed timber that I got from my grandfather's the other month to start a project that's been on the "my wife asked me to make this for her over a year ago but I'm only now just getting around to it" list. It was meant to be a quick and easy build. Behind our front door we've got a mirror, and under that mirror is a lovely convenient space for a coat/key rack, which I'm going to trick out a little bit by also adding a wireless charging unit for the mobile phones. I haven't made a full solid hardwood project in a while, and I certainly have not made one from reclaimed timber where things actually need to be kind of square. With only hand tools at my disposal really, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. However, I will start by docking everything down and cutting the rough length on my one big power tool, the lovely Bosch Mortisaw. Then it's over to the DIY 3-inch jointer to try and get a square edge on two sides. Fortunately, these boards were right at the exact width I can handle, and in a few passes we had them looking a bit prettier. No idea what timber it is, but if I had to guess, I think it's blackbutt. All I know is it was bloody heavy and tough as nails. Speaking of homemade tools, I haven't broke this one out in a while. It's my homemade table saw. This was just a prototype model, and so I'd never really gone on to build my full plans yet. However, as you can see, with stock this size, it actually worked quite well. Resawing, however, is not something that table saw is capable of effectively, so I pulled out the Triton and got a jig going with the edge guide to get these boards most of the way through. Didn't quite have the capacity, but no worries, because the Ryoba allowed me to very quickly finish off the cut. This took my stock down to about 22mm, thereabouts. My target was 19 or 3/4 of an inch, but to do that, I'm going to need a thicknesser, which I also don't have. So it was time to slice up some scrap form ply to improve my old router sled. So this is my thicknesser, my new thicknesser. I had a little sled, but this one, which has got some T-nuts here holding it down to the workbench and a lot more travel, is going to do me quite well. There's only one problem. I find myself enjoying making these sort of hacked up, rubbish looking jigs out of scrap than often I do working on the project that I'm supposed to be working on, which is going to look pretty, maybe, at the end of it. Yeah, well, it's all woodwork. With that knocked up and some relatively flat sides from the jointer, I'm using my router now to pass out about 2mm to really get a nice finish side. Some sanding and it was time for the glue up. Except, in my milling process, I realised that I've gone a bit thin and lost a bit more on the edge jointing than I intended. No matter though, it was one of those feck up to feature times, as I got a piece of the old Meranti from my parents' veranda demolition, which I did last year, and that gave me the extra width I needed, added a nice contrasting piece of wood, and on top of that, meant I now have part of my grandfather's place and my parents' place into this build, which is quite nice. AccuCut ripped me down a nice piece that was thin enough to get the width I needed. I haven't actually glued up a hardwood panel like this for a very long time. Fortunately just the one today. Very impressed with how my jointer worked, got a nice straight bit of squeeze out there. Couple of cawls on the end, I could leave that overnight to dry. Close enough to flat for me, and I love that contrasting stripe in the middle. I did most of my sanding now, but would have to do some more a little bit later on. Right, so wifey uses some makeup and things at the mirror behind the door, and so I wanted a few little trays. They're very shallow, and again, the router sled came to the rescue. I've actually clamped my router base in place there, so I can just drag it slowly like you see to do the vertical lines, and now I've clamped the sled in place here to do the horizontal lines. That's just giving me the outline of 3 shallow little trays. Then I could come back with a 19mm bit set to the same depth and hog out all the middle by hand nice and easily. The Dremel sandpaper eraser got rid of the router burn marks. and I could finally cut it down to length back at the miter saw. My mate gave me one of these lovely little wireless chargers, naked one, which I was going to have to mortise in very, very thinly. This was going to be the trickiest part of the build. Here I am just getting the rough depth and making sure that I've got my dimensions correct. Then I had to take it all the way down to about 2.5 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Through the glare, you can just see we've achieved that, but God, that router sled has absolutely been the savior on this particular build. CNC would have been nice, but this got me through. Even had to break out the chisels. Watch out, dodgy hand tool usage. But I did a lot of shaping and fiddling around with that mortise and chisels just to get everything fitting. I decided I did want to put a cap over the top. These wireless chargers don't generate any heat at all, basically. And seeing as how I had a nice tight fit for the cap, I could just use the router sled again to bring it down to the exact correct thickness. That cap was actually the thin offcut that I did when resawing the boards. I chopped down some screws to be very, very small and secured them in place. So I've just spent all afternoon cutting out this mortise, and my greatest fear was being able to get this thin enough that the wireless charger will work. That's only about 2.5 mils, and I was really worried. I tested it and it's fantastic. It does charge. And then I did this. The mortise is on the right side, but this is the front of the coat rack. And that's where I've put the cord exit instead of out the back. Oh my God, that is bloody frustrating. I can just plug that up, but measure twice, cut once. Right, Dirk and Chris? Smeg. So I need the back to be removable in case I ever need to get the cord for the charger out again. So I'm going to use pocket holes, and I'm cutting a very small rebate here just to hide that joinery a little bit. And you can see I cut the new trench too. Took a moment just to start on the backing board now, but my screws were too long that came with my lovely hooks. Here's a good trick. When you need to cut them down, you don't want to lose that sharp little end bit of the screw. So pop it in the bag, give it a good squeeze with the pliers, and you will save it from flying across the room or in your eye. Sandpaper on the Dremel gives me the point back on the screw, and then I can mark out and drill my holes. They won't be installed till right at the end though. Actually quite a bit going on this backing board. There are going to be 4 pocket holes, 2 key holes, and of course a trench down the middle for the cable, which I don't want hitting those screws. So it was very important to mark everything out carefully before going over to the K5 and getting my 5 mounting holes in. Then it was time for something kind of tricky. Okay, not claiming I invented this because I'm sure everything woodworking's been done before, but I just spent about an hour figuring this out. Almost Cuffy level mathematics. Follow along. So what I want is a dowel that goes in here on the correct angle in order to act as a support brace from here to the back. To do that, I'm going to use my pocket hole jig. Pocket hole's cut at 15 degrees. What I need, figured out, is 25 degrees. So if I can add an extra 10 degree to my pocket hole, I should be able to get this dowel hole at the exact correct angle to go up into there like that. So first we'll just mark it out. That'll put it 10 millimeter from the edge. So over at the miter saw, I've cut these 2 blocks at 10 degrees. Block, adding 10 degrees. In goes the board, resting up against the block, clamping down, and lining my mark up with the C hole until that touches. Counter wedge, clamp down. So that should be a repeatable cut. Now the last trick, that's a regular 9.5 millimeter drill bit, because I don't want that little bit at the end of the pocket hole jamming through the front of my wood. I want a flat-ish bottom for the dowel. I should come through only that far. Wish me luck. And now we pray that worked. Didn't come through the front. Looking pretty nicely positioned there. 9.5 millimeter dowel. backing board. Bloody lovely. This hole's going to be a lot easier. That was the tricky one. Chuffed. With those 25-degree ones perfect, the back ones had to be 65 degrees, but they were shallow enough I could just freehand them. Now there's not going to be any glue in this side, these just need to be a resting point effectively for those braces so I can still remove that backboard at will. Just need to trim those dowels down a little bit and do the Townsville shuffle, check and square till it all looks good. Powering along now, that's the relief channel for the cable at the back. And then as we mentioned, this will be held to the wall with 2 keyholes. I like the Kreg screws for this because they got the nice wide pan head. Now it was time to start sanding properly. I went all the way to 320 with this, and because the wireless charger is a little bit finicky as to where you need to put the foam, I've carved a small lightning bolt in the top so that you know where to dump it. While I had the Dremel out, less than elegant signing of the maker's mark on the back, but no one will see this, so my childish 5-year-old handwriting will do. This is not the finish, this is the Feast Watson sanding sealer, which I have done a review video on why I use it, but you can already see the colours starting to pop. The support dowels I wanted to be black to match the metal on the mirror, so it got a few coats of sanding sealer, followed up by some proof tint also in the Feast Watson, which was very handy too for doing some staining on the carvings. There are all the pieces. Bit complicated for a simple build, but we got there in the end. Final assembly time, and about the only glue going on this were supporting the dowels to the main body, because as we said, that back needs to be removable. And we can finally drive the pocket holes home, just to test the final appearance and get it ready for its actual finish, which would be Danish oil. It was about this point that I realised my Danish oil, which I have stored in a jam jar, had pretty much turned to Danish jelly. Not as airtight as I would have hoped, sadly. I decided to save it to save myself a few dollars, being the tight ass that I am, poured in some terps, gave it a stir, and tested on the back cover for the wireless charger, and wouldn't you bloody know it, it actually still worked. A bit more fussy to use because you had to rub it in very, very well, but at least I ain't tipping it down the drain. But yeah, storing your Danish oil in a jam jar, I wouldn't recommend. It's been there about a month, still usable, but it'll probably go in the bin then. After 2 coats of that, it was time for some beeswax finish, screw on my lovely hooks, and install the wireless charger. Now I just had double-sided tape on it to begin with, but I actually had to go back and use some screws because that wasn't holding very well. And here you can see why I needed the removable back. Locking it down, and we're ready to install. Might also note the nice dodgy little repair I did on my failed cord slot. To ensure I drilled the holes in my living room wall in the correct place, I did a full trace using baking paper, marking where the top of the keyholes would be, as that's where the drill bit needs to go on. Took it upstairs with the hammer drill, used the awl to mark it out, and installed a few little greenie plugs. Doesn't need to take much weight, this. They should be more than strong enough. Again, I like the panhead Kreg screws for these sorts of mounts. Took off the mirror to get it in place correctly. And around this time I was super happy not only with how my drilling went so that the mirror sat dead flush with the new coat rack, but also how nicely the black butt actually managed to, completely by accident, match the mango wood that is on the mirror. This cable organizer from Bunnings is super cheap and it just really made such a difference. It looks so nice. Plug her in, give her a test. Power! Before we wrap up the project for today, I'd like to say thanks for watching all the way through, and if you'd like to consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like, it really does help me out. Cheers. Well, there you have it all done. As I am utilising the space behind my front door, I've had to put an extra long door stop down the bottom to make sure it doesn't get bashed as that door opens. But otherwise, for what was meant to be a fairly simple project, there was quite a lot going on, a bit more than I expected. But I'm really, really happy with this, and wifey now has a place to do her makeup in the morning, and we can store all the bits and pieces that otherwise collect around the living room in a much more organised and lovely fashion. Very happy to get a hardwood project knocked over, and it's nice to see some woodworking on this channel for a change, isn't it? I'll catch you on the next video very soon. Take care, see you later.